I want to switch registers a little bit. I was really gratified. I'm incredibly grateful to the organizers of this gathering for this moment to pause. Part of what we're supposed to be doing, be able to do as intellectuals located in academia is to actually pause and to stop the chain of signification as it goes by. And part of what I wanted to do with this paper is to think about, given this moment of pause, as to what a decolonial, deproperty university would look like. More than that, how to decolonize, deproperty the grounds of knowledge. And one of the things I was trying to play around with is how can we analyze the ways in which the ethical subject that's at the heart of the university is also an economic subject, right? So to kind of figure out the relationship between the ethical and the economic in the university, in particular from the perspective of interdisciplinary fields and units that are associated with newness, with an innovation, right? Which so easily can be commodified, right? The newness of the next commodity. As opposed to another kind of an alternative valuation, right, which would draw upon our communities, our histories, our traditions that are absolutely refuse and absolutely refuse property in all forms. Part of that had to, the other part of the paper that I wanted to take this time to reflect on was the intent to call for time to pay attention to the lessons of the illiterate, right? How might we, as the literate, might need to actually stop and pay attention to what's going on with the illiterate, in particular the contractually illiterate, illiteracy associated with the subprime debtor, right? And the lessons that I was trying to spell out, that they spelled out for us, is the systemic hoax, right? The systemic gambling with debt, right? For which they paid the legitimate price, and that we are now paying the price for it, and certainly our students in the form directly of rising tuition, but also what it is for us to gather at this moment when the world is on fire, right? From Wisconsin to Tunisia to Egypt. So those are some just like the broad questions I wanted to throw out for us to be able to assess today and to kind of grapple with some very, very hard contradictions, really, really hard tensions that we saw in the papers, right? Between institutionalization and movement building, right? Between permanence and monumentality, and on one hand, and impermanence, ephemerality, the centrifugal, right? The center that actually gathers forces that just want to decenter at the same time. My work comes out of a real belief. My work, especially in contemporary Filipino-American performance and art, is grounded in belief that culture lives on and survives, typically really indirectly, right? Through cohabitation, contamination of dominant signs and economies. And that's where I am really drawn to interdisciplinary fields like performance studies, for example, that really insists on the study, the analysis of ephemerality that repeats, right? That lives and dies on the stage or in non-stage settings, a presence that never dies. And I'm also interested, right, in the ways in which postcolonial studies, subaltern studies in particular, make us pay attention not so much to the oppositional relationship between the colonizer and colonized, for example, between the minoritized and the majority, but the appositional. How, again, alternative values, alternative cultures and ethics live on, despite the, So the other perspective that I kind of come from is as a scholar affiliated with Filipino-American studies, and just also from somebody who's affiliated with fields that are considered new and small, right? in some ways, I always learn from Indigenous studies scholars in particular that we cannot play the group game of group power, group numbers, right? This is why I quoted, the Samoan Guide to Studies, which, has us pay attention to tenets like, number 1, keep the topics open and flexible. Number 2, don't be afraid to do it your way and avoid addiction to any one approach to research and publication. Number 3, study what and publish what you in and of Samoa need to publish, not what someone else might consider appropriate. Number 4, results get resources rather than the other way around. These are principles that very much are not about playing that big game of group power, but it's another way of approaching numbers. Might there be another game of numbers that we can play? From my vantage, as someone who owes it all to ethics studies movements and scholars who allowed me this space in the university, I've always learned that ethics studies always exceeds the university, always talks to students, alumni, larger communities, and social movements that are the very origins for why we're in the university in the first place. So instead of perhaps thinking about rhetoric strategies that will, get us, that require us to say things that we don't want to say, might we think about a power of rhetoric backed by alternative numbers? That is, going after our alumni, starting with our students, of course, our alumni and alternate communities and organizations. I'm reminded always of Martin Luther King Jr. when he said, probably why he got assassinated, power is when you're able to make them say yes when they want to say no. So how might we think of the power of rhetoric in a different way? So instead of adjusting ourselves to speak to the administration wherein we're saying yes when we really mean no, how can we make the conditions, create the conditions where an administration must say yes when they really want to say no? Part of this has to do with what all ethnic studies and other, minoritized, interdisciplinary faculty are very familiar with, which is hours and hours of outreach, right? Hours and hours of community building. When you find yourself, Friday night around 10:30 p.m. in the back of some student organization's room, listening to very bad spoken word, you know what I'm talking about, right? And you're just there. You got to be there, and you're just dying. But that's what we have. That's what we do. And there's something. But part of what so part of it is just that labor, right? That we know that we do. That we know we're doing the job of 3 to 4 faculty and civil disciplinary units. We know that. We're not stupid, right? But we also have a different goal, right? We have a different vision. But I think along with that, we have to be a little bit unafraid of being accused of being not rigorous, not doing real scholarship, not being excellent, right? Being a little bit crass, obsessed with identity, provincial rather than cosmopolitan, right? We have to be able to live with that because in the end, that's what they're going to think about us anyways, right? So part of it I think I'm trying to call for is to refuse the bribery that comes with being, especially after tenure, one of the handpicked selection of brown, black people who could be accepted as members of the Western Academy, who are designated sometimes capable of thought, right? Subjects of transparency in Luis de Silva's phrase, or rather subjects of transparency in a minor key. Part of this has to do, part of my thoughts today also have to do with organizing for the past 3 years now, the critical ethics studies. So this is part of how I can be crass. The Critical Ethics Studies Conference, next Thursday through Saturday at UC Riverside. So I'm going to do that right here. What this has to do with what I've learned from organizing with this really kind of outgunned, completely outgunned, outnumbered, outbudgeted collective of faculty and students there who have absolutely no sense of propriety, no manners at all, is that this kind of work that we do doesn't have to be out of a sense of being deprived, right? Or being like, like we're always kind of out of a sense of poverty, but rather out of a sense of extravagance, and also out of real learning. The discussions and the conversations, even as we're running around, putting together over 1,500 registration packets and stapling things, is that part of the discussions that all the discussions around strategy, around what we want to do, what we're failing to do, what we and as part of this organization, is that it makes you keep up with what's going on. It keeps you sharp. It keeps you intellectually on your game. And it makes it possible for the university still to be a site of thought, dissent, and experiment, which I think is what we're supposed to be about. Let's see, part of, so I think what I'm kind of calling for is a renewed commitment, rethought the commitment of the interdisciplinary humanities. Why it is that positivism, the positivistic study of culture, for example, is something that is innately something that I reject, because again, I'm sorry, I'm actually still recovering from the flu, so I'm a little bit hallucinatory, but I want for us to be able to push back on the arguments that expressive culture, the arts, are not are so much human capital that can be used for the entertainment or the enrichment of the elite classes. I'm actually half Singaporean, so I know exactly what Singapore is about. They're shopping, right, for new ideas, and they've got the money to back them. We have to counter any proposal or argument that the humanities is going to be the force for the university to reconfigure itself as the new shopping mall. We must also grapple, I think, with the idea of the critic that is at the heart of the liberal arts as we know it in the West, when the critic is distanced from, a mere spectator of the multitudes and the masses, a source of elite taste, judgment, interpretation from a safe distance. How can we perhaps come back to the idea of the critic as a source of reflection, of self-reflection, rather than as a spectator? What's at stake here is the nature of that distance, that distanciation that is necessary for critique. So on the one hand, we can be oriented toward the university and continue to fulfill the role of philosophy and liberal arts as that kind of distant interpreter and spectator of culture, or we can try to reorient ourselves back towards social movements and the arts and expressive cultures. For me in particular, this involves what might be a really romanticist idea of the artist. I believe that artists see the totality of the world. My role of the critic is to provide some sense of conversation, right, between the artists who may see, but actually who do see the totality of the world, but in some sense they don't see what they do see, right? So that to me is the role of the critic. That is the dynamic between the critic and the artist. It's also why I stayed in graduate school in academia when I couldn't figure out what I was trying to do in terms of Filipino-American cultural critique and the critique of the United States empire. I started to meet artists, filmmakers, writers, who started to listen to me, not for too long. They didn't take me super seriously, but they told me that I needed to say what I need to say. So again, there's that dynamic between the critic and the artist that I could see what my role is. I just want to conclude with a couple more observations about the subject of critique. The subject of critique, I think, must allow herself to be changed by the encounter with the object of critique. I was really entranced, transformed by Catherine Bell Stockton's paper in which she refers to Ballet's feast and to the idea of gut semiotics, letting the caviar blow one's mind, in that servants, who was also, of course, a master chef from Paris, in that servants' extravagant feast for her employers. There's that strange magnificence of the servants, the workers' extravagance. And we always know that it's rich people who are the stingiest people in the world, right? So what I'm trying to get at is, in my own work, is that the unfathomability of giving it all away, even in the moment of utter crisis and budget cuts, giving it all away in ways that make no sense under capitalism. But I'm just, and I just want to add, though, that at the end, that these questions are really hard questions. These are really hard contradictions that I hope we can spend some time addressing today. Again, in terms of the real tensions and contradictions between institutionalization and movement building, and what is the contradiction between occupying the role of the spectator and the role of the spectacle. That is, the elitist. Are we as critics elitist judges of taste, or can we continue to be sources of reflection that is itself also self-reflexive? Are we objects of entertainment for the rest of the university, or can we be the subjects of dazzling, mind-blowing critique? Thank you.